This is my son's bass, which I clearly cannot play. For his birthday, I promised to make him a stand for it. The idea was to have a nice display type stand so the guitar could be out in the open instead of hidden away in the case. So when looking around for some ideas, I came across this website called takeastandinc.com, and I'll put a link for it down in the description. They have a really interesting type of guitar stand that they sell. We really like the flowing lines and the fact that it could come apart easily and pack flat. After all, I do want the kid to move out at some point. Now, I'm not going for an exact copy, but my design certainly will draw heavily upon theirs. So let's get started. So first in SketchUp, I started with some square shapes and worked on different angles and curves until I got a design that we liked, and then I printed out the pattern actual sized on many, many sheets of paper. You see, I know how to make a table, and I know how to make shelves, and I know how to make all kinds of things that have nice straight lines and have to fit certain things. But this is all curves, and it's going to hold the guitar, which is all curves, and it all has to work together in a 3D. So it's right. Paper pattern, then I'm going to make a test piece with wood, and even then I might end up starting over again because you got to get it right. Something like that. So I was trying to mock it up by just attaching it with a screw and not making the notch. I didn't want to commit, but the guitar is just way too heavy for this. It just completely overpowers that one little screw. So up at this end, I've already cut the notch and fitted this in, and I'm just going to do that now. Same thing here. So here's the prototype so far. One thing I've learned is that with a freeform shape like this, it is so important to build a prototype because it was a lot of work to get to this point. So I'm going to bring the camera in closer now so we can focus in on some of the details and talk about them. Here it took me 3 tries to get the angle right for the interlocking base. With the first one, I forgot about how the notch affects things, so it worked like this. But when you put the notch in, it's closer and then the feet weren't touching. With the second notch, everything seemed okay, but the whole stand was not at all stable. It would tip over at the slightest touch. I still don't quite understand why. With the third position, the stand is now solid. This has been really illuminating, as I would not have anticipated that such a small difference in position would make such a huge difference in performance. I'll have to be sure that the final legs match the pattern here of the base very carefully. Now the inspiration for this project used metal rods here for holding the neck of the guitar. I didn't like the look of that, and I'm not a metal worker, but most importantly, I wanted this whole thing to be knocked down. So I designed this, again, with a notch so it would come apart. To accommodate the notch here, the stand has to extend above the top. Now originally, I first had it up here. This was my first design from what I designed in SketchUp, and then I drew on paper and cut out, but we found that this just held the guitar a bit too high above the ground, so then I moved it down here, and I still need to cut this off here. It needs to extend a little bit above the clamp so that there's some meat in the wood here to hold the knockdown piece. So with the prototype sorted out, it was time to move on to building the final product. I picked up a nice piece of cherry for that purpose. Here I'm laying the pieces of the prototype out in different arrangements on the cherry plank and trying to decide where I'm going to cut them out of the cherry. I'm looking for some fairly straight grain that somewhat follows the shape of the pattern. So the base is quite wide, and I do not have a piece of cherry that's wide enough for this, so I need to cut two pieces out and glue them together. And I thought what I would do to make things interesting is I'm going to glue a strip of maple down the middle of this base piece. Maple and cherry go really well together, I think, and it adds a bit of visual interest and makes for a more custom, interesting design. So the grain goes in this direction, but because of the way I'm cutting the pieces together, I really want I wanted the grain to follow the curve as much as possible, so I angled the cut. So this is the part that's going to come and be glued together, like this. Now this, it's not exactly long grain, it's not exactly end grain, it's sort of on the angle like that. Glue is probably okay, but because I've got a dowel jig, I'm just going to reinforce the joint with dowels and I will just feel safer. Here I've traced out and finessed what I call the base. And finally, we took the upright and laid it into position. I never did really work to make this a perfect curve. I figure I could do that here when I will be cutting this on the bandsaw. I will stay well outside the lines, and then I will bring that closer to the line with the spindle sander. I made this just a little bit too wide, so I've shaved off a really thin piece of maple that I'm going to glue in there so that we have a nice tight connection as much as possible. This joint is brought to you by the wonders of masking tape. So as you might imagine, there was a lot of sanding and shaping with this project. A lot. The notches needed a lot of work, and I found that the file actually worked a lot better than sandpaper. We really want these to fit just nice. And then I rounded everything over on the router table. Now the head on the end of the neck of my son's guitar was an asymmetric shape, so I had to get creative with carving notches into this part of my stand so that it would hold the guitar vertically, and that required a lot of back and forth between the sander and the stand to test everything out. The most important thing is to not drop the guitar. So, got a minor disaster here. I bumped it, it fell, and it snapped right along the grain. I say minor disaster because I'll glue it up and it should be fine. Now this is frustrating because the exact same thing happened on the prototype, and I thought, oh well, I fixed that one up, it'll never happen again. But it did. So, once I glue it back together, I will be poking a dowel through here, reinforcing dowel, so that this hopefully does not ever happen again. For the final step in the build process, I pulled out some scraps of leather and cut and fitted two pieces to be around the neck support where the guitar hangs. This will hopefully provide some padding and reduce the chance of the guitar getting marked up from friction. So now that it's finished, let me show you how it goes together. We got the base, we got the top, we got the back. It's all flat and it just goes together in notches. Just slides in. There we go. So just for fun, here's the prototype beside the finished product. And so that brings us to the end. Now it's kind of hard to fit this into the shot. I'm going to put some close-ups at the end of the video of the various components so you can get a close look at it. When it's really all said and done, there's only three parts here. There's what I call the base, there's the vertical part, and then there's the neck support. It's just three pieces, but with those free-flowing curves, it was quite the challenge to get it to this point. And I'd like to thank you for dropping by and watching. And come back next time or subscribe if you think I've earned it, and you can be notified of the next project that's coming down the pipe. Thanks very much. Helps if you remember to push record.